In this video, we are going to cover searching the literature. Now, searching the literature is a really key skill for student midwives because for almost every assignment that you do, you're going to need to look at the literature on the topic that you are studying or writing a report on or doing an exam on. Being able to find relevant literature is really important to make sure you understand the topic fully and so that you also gain the marks that you want. It's also really important for when you're working clinically because you're going to need to give women advice, you're going to need to practice in a manner that is supported by evidence and supported by the literature. If you can't find that literature, you're going to find it hard to find suitable sources to base your work on. So what do we mean by the literature? Because that's actually quite an abstract concept. But essentially, the literature is any written material that's been published on a topic. That can be the form of scholarly articles, so that's, for example, research reports in journals. It can be kind of bigger reports, for example, reports by governing bodies, it could be reports by the NHS, investigational bodies, etc. It could be guidelines, such as those published by either the RCM, NICE, or the RCOG. It can also be books. Often books are really good to give you an existing overview of the literature, but because they take a long time to write, and they may not have been published recently, they don't always contain the most up-to-date information. And there are other relevant sources that you may find when you're searching the literature as well. Journal articles are often considered the most important part of the literature that you can find when you're doing a literature search. From the previous slide, these would be considered scholarly articles. A journal in itself is a publication. You can think of it a little bit like a magazine, and in it are various articles, various opinion pieces, various pieces of published research, all about one particular topic. And there are lots of journals. Some of them are better than others, so you do have to pick your journal carefully. Ones that you might have already heard of include the British Journal of Midwifery, the Practicing Midwife, there's also MIDAs. These are all midwifery journals, and each journal has its specific kind of slant on things, its specific scope of practice. Making sure you've got a reputable journal is very important. When we talk about articles that we find in journals, sometimes we can be a bit confusing because people often use different words to mean the same thing. For example, they may just call it a journal, even though they're not talking about the full journal, they're just talking about one paper in the journal. They may just call it a paper, or they may call it a research paper, or they may just call it an article. But they do all essentially mean the same thing, which is an article that's been published in a journal. Now we're going to look at how we start to find the literature. There are many places you can search for the literature, and Middlesex Library has lots of helpful guides about how to use the library website and also how to use the databases from the journals which are on the library website. However, it can be really useful to use Google Scholar to do an initial what we call scoping search. This means it's an informal search where you're looking kind of to see what literature is out there before you formally use the databases. Now, Google Scholar is not perfect because, like Google, often it tries to give you the results that it thinks you want to see. So it's a bit biased. There's also no way of recreating your search, so it's exactly like it was before, which there is with a database. However, it is a really useful tool, and we shouldn't ignore the fact that lots of people are going to use it. To get to Google Scholar, I'm just going to pop Scholar into the search bar, and you can see here we can click through to Google Scholar. I then need to ask Google the question. I need to put the words in so that it was going to give me some results. In this case, I want to look at premature birth and delayed cord clamping. So I thought of my question in my head, which is, to what extent does cord clamping help premature infants and their outcomes? Into the Google Scholar search bar, I'm going to enter the key words associated with my question. Now you can ask Google a question, so I could say, what are the benefits of delayed cord clamping for premature neonates? But I can also just put the keywords in. I'm going to click search, and you can see I've got lots and lots of articles which contain the words I have searched for. What I would do to make sure I'm kind of getting some results that are at least in the direction I want to go to, I'm going to just initially scan the titles. So we can see here I've got some articles that do look appropriate. Now, because I want to make sure that the research I'm looking at or the articles I'm trying to get out recent and therefore relevant, I can look here to the left and I can search by time. I can look at anything that was published this year, 2020, 2017, or I can put in a custom range. And normally, anything published within the last 5 years is considered relevant. Work before that can be included if it's considered what we call seminal. That means it's highly influential, highly important, and should be considered when you're looking at the literature. Because of COVID, there is a bit of a paucity, so not many articles published in 2020. So that's just something to be aware of when you are searching the literature. So I'm going to put 2016 in here. Click search, and this is going to remove any articles that were published before 2016. I'm going to continue to look at these titles. Not every journal article will be useful for me, so I'm going to look at the titles before I choose which one that I'm going to click through on. For example, this one sounds like it may be useful to me. This is an evaluation of an introduction of delayed cord clamping protocol for premature infants in a high volume maternity centre. Google Scholar will provide you with a link so you can access the paper. And this paper is being hosted on the NCBI website, which is part of the PMC. So this is the US National Library of Medicine, and they provide a lot of what is called open access, which means anybody can access them, papers. They're not a journal in itself, it's just what hosts the journal article. See on the left here, I can download it as a PDF, which makes it easier for us to read. This is the really important bit, which is being able to read a journal article. Now, the more you read of these, the easier it's going to be, because it's a little bit like picking up a new language, and you suddenly understand where things are meant to be on the paper, what slots in where, what might be missing. But unless you keep reading them, you won't pick it up as a skill. From this initial page, I can see some really key information. Firstly, I can see which journal it's been published in, and here it's been published in the Obstetric Gynecology Journal. And I can see when it was published, which journal, which issue, and which page numbers. And this is important because, as I said, not every journal is the same quality. If it's an article that's been published in a really poor journal, you might need to disregard it. For example, it may not have been peer reviewed. I can see the title, and I can also see the authors, and I can see where they work. And this is important because partly you want to know that this research is going to be relevant to you from the title, but you also want to know who's written it and their credentials. So we can see these authors, they've got PhDs, it's a big team, they've come from big teaching hospitals, and that's a good indicator of this research quality. So moving on, I've got the abstract. And although from the title I thought this research would be useful, from the abstract I can read in more depth about the research. You'll always find the abstract at the start of the paper. You'll notice that they are generally the same format. Often they've got subheadings in them which match the subheadings of the bigger paper, so you should read the abstract before deciding if you want to read the rest of the paper. In this case, I've read the abstract and I think this is still what I want to know about, so I'm going to read the rest of the paper. Moving through the rest of the paper, most papers will follow this similar format, so once you've read one, you should know what to expect for the next. They'll start off with something that may be called the introduction, it might be called the background, or it might be called the literature review. And this gives you an idea of some of the existing literature apart from this paper, why they did the research, the importance of the research, and an overview of the background to the research. Keep going down and you will find the methods. This is really crucial, and this is probably the most important part of any research paper, because this tells you exactly what they did, and it's here you might find flaws in their research, it's where you might find bias, it's where you might find things that call into question the quality of the research. So we keep going down through the methods section, and after the methods sections we're going to find the results. And again, this is an important section because it tells you what they found from the research. Sometimes they may present their results in written text, like here in paragraphs, or they may present them in figures or tables or graphs, and that's all useful and all important. Following the results, there should always be some discussion of the results. So you want the authors to explain what the results mean and what they mean in the context of the wider literature, but also the context of the study. Following the discussion, you'll see some references. Now, it's important, of course, that your work is backed up, whether you're a student or whether you're publishing in a journal. And the references are also a really good place to look for other literature, because by doing this research, the authors will have looked at the literature and therefore you'll be able to find it in their reference list. This is particularly useful if you are, trying to do your own research, and this is something called backchaining. And you can see in this paper they've given us additional information because they've given us figures and graphs following on from the results. So that is a brief overview of how to find some literature using Google Scholar and a brief overview of how to read a paper. As I said, it takes practice, so keep looking at them, look at topics in relation to other assignments and other modules, and the more you read, the easier it will be. And look at the library resources as well, as this is just one method of finding literature.